I'm Dr. Ann Mary Montero. I'm a health psychologist and coming to you today with Psychology Works, information to help tap our brain know-how and leverage ways that we can quickly and effectively help you feel better. This video is intended to assist people suffering from stress, especially extra stress with the current COVID-19 pandemic. It has perhaps brought to the surface underlying anxiety and fear that many of us experience day to day or at baseline. I understand. I specialize in anxiety, and with 20 years experience in medical psychology, I am accustomed and honored to meeting people at that intersection of challenges in their lives and then new stressors, including at the moment the COVID-19 pandemic. What a difficult, incredibly difficult and stressful topic. However, we have tools that can help us leverage what works best in ways that are not boring, don't sound like they're delivered from somebody who's not even human themselves. Hopefully in manageable bites, things that you have time to implement, and suggestions that can really make a positive difference in your life, helping you to feel more in control and closer to the way you want to feel day to day. So let's leverage that so we can help you move toward feeling better. Quickly, what I hope to cover is a brief intro on coping with anxiety and its challenges, including COVID-19, risk factors contributing to anxiety and why it's more difficult with COVID, and tips that you can use now within your reach at home that can help you enhance control and coping so that you can feel better even under the same circumstances. So, self-care with psychologists often focuses on something called the biopsychosocial model. It's a mouthful, but intended to represent a triangle that has three aspects of core human functioning at each of the corners. One is medical or physical. The top is psychological, so mental or emotional. And the other corner is social or behavioral. So things happening around you, and I always include, and your own response to that. So what you're doing, what people around you are doing, how you're thinking and feeling, and then what's going on for you physically or medically. I commonly work with people who are experiencing chronic medical illness, and so we want to acknowledge whether your stressors are medical or financial, relationship-driven, work-driven, or related to the current news experience. We want to identify aspects of functioning from each of those corners that we can harness to help people proactively move towards self-care, intending to kind of reset and equip you better to cope with stress. So I focus on something I call the 3 R's: routine, reframe, and renew with each of those corners. Our bodies and our minds love routine. The more that we can enhance what we're doing to have a flow, a consistency of what to expect, our brains will feel more in control and will have less arousal in terms of the fight or flight stress response. Just one aspect of things that we can do to try to help ourselves feel better. 2 really key activities that we would want to physically invoke as part of that routine are focus on sleep and exercise. We have huge effect sizes in psychological literature for both. That means we know they are important. This comes as no surprise to anybody. We've all heard about exercise for years, but often many people have that reaction. If they're not regular exercisers, it may feel daunting to begin or unpleasant to do. And I often call to mind with patients, I remember from high school physics, the principle of startup energy, the idea that it takes much more effort to go from 0 to 1 than it does to go from 1 to a much higher number. So getting over, recognizing there's that hump at the beginning of getting anything going, but once you do, you'll have natural momentum to help you accomplish more and more easily. So recognizing that there will be that bump of challenge to get beyond for most folks, but once they do, they would expect to feel greater and greater ease and greater benefit. So with patients, I'll often start with something that feels accessible so that they're not reaching for something that would make that first bump even higher. We might begin with, say, 10 or 15 minutes of gentle walking or gentle stretching, something that they could self-identify as a behavior and activity that they could access without tremendous strain. And then as they begin to do that, initially not increasing that level, but just holding with that 10 or 15 minutes so that they can reinforce that they are accomplishing that. And then once that's a practice behavior, at least for a few days, then begin to add on, let's say 3 or 5 minutes every 3 days. So twice a week, you might add on, if I start with 15 minutes walking, middle of the week, I'm up to 20, weekend, I'm up to 25, the next week, 30, 35, and by the end of a couple of weeks, I'll be up to what most physicians recommend we do, barring any other major medical needs. So 45 or 50 minutes, let's say 4 or 5 days a week, which would be a radical change from not exercising at all. Even considering exercise, as I mentioned in a recent interview, is already progress toward exercising because it's allowing that to enter your mindset of a possibility. So I would reframe that as a nice transition to our next R, is something that's within reach. Reframing is about shifting your mental focus and shifting your thoughts, which we know are closely related to our feelings, although it's supposed to be easier to change our thoughts than our feelings. So, and our brain looks for congruence between those. So if we're feeling down, our brain tends to look for things that reinforce, for example, why we should be feeling down. It's gloomy outside today, or I can't go out with COVID-19 the way I want to. And so no wonder I feel blah. On top of a healthy sense of self-compassion, we would want to help allow ourselves the possibility to shift our thoughts to something that is still realistic but more positive. We might do that in a number of ways, like examine the evidence. What suggests that I should feel that way? This is especially helpful with anxious and catastrophic thoughts, like thinking, I can't go out, I'll never be able to go out again, or our society will never get back to normal, as opposed to reframing, like shifting a camera lens to still see the same content, but with a different perspective. We know from social science that the more we can focus on things, difficult things, being external, isolated in time, for example, this will not last forever. This is driven by this specific circumstance, and then focusing on places where we still have control, activities we can do to maintain what feeds us well will be beneficial. Lastly, on that triangle, I would focus on renew. These are places where we can consciously add in behaviors that allow our body to reset and refresh. That may be purposeful scheduling of pleasurable activities, looking for social connections, be them virtual or safely in person with social distancing at the moment. Or other ways that we can allow our brains to re-energize. This may be as simple as, for example, adding music from a positive time in your life to an activity that you're doing, or taking regularly scheduled breaks from working at home. Many of us are feeling intensive pressure working from home. We're out of our routine and normal structure that had likely been in place prior to COVID-19. We have often more fractured attention. Our focus is potentially disrupted with other pressing roles or needs like family responsibilities at home. And some of the places where we counted on experience from the outside, like having provision of our basic needs like groceries or having education for our children, the ways of getting those things have been altered. So it's understandable to feel out of control to some degree, but we can shift the lens of our thinking to adapt and feel better about that. And the more that we engage in effort to harness our thoughts closer to how we want to feel, we expect with some slight time lag, our feelings will often eventually follow along with that and then halo out to a better experience, which can go a long way toward diminishing anxiety and even mood symptoms like depression. I mentioned before exercise as well as sleep. Sleep has an enormous impact on our well-being. This is, of course, intuitive and understandable, but it's our first line of defense to help protect ourselves. And often, for many of us, the first place where stress will show up is sleep disruption. That is very common now with COVID-19 and any type of crisis. There are two main principles around sleep that we want to bear in mind, trying to keep a curve elevated up front and diminished lower for both activity and stress. So we would allow ourselves exposure to things, necessary life things like bills and work, things that might evoke stress earlier in the day, so that later in the day we can protect a bit from that and allow our bodies to settle back down. It takes time for that stress response, the residual effects of that, to wear off. And secondly, we would expect activity to be greater in the day to allow for natural fatigue at night. Secondly, the second main principle around sleep we want to adhere to is routine where possible. So the more that you can cue your body regularly with a flow, I like the idea of flow more than schedule, but the same set of events or behaviors generally in the same order, so that you can condition your body to be cued for sleep by the time your head hits the pillow. I recommend journaling to kind of download thoughts before you go to sleep, and then physically putting that away so that it is both literally and symbolically out of reach, and then shifting activities to something that is more restful, like guided imagery, progressive muscle relaxation, just even deep breathing. I like to accompany that with some guided imagery from YouTube. My favorite is Jason Stevenson. I will pop in an earbud as I lay down to sleep, and I used to be able to get through at the beginning 30 minutes. Quickly it became 3 minutes, and now I can't even get through 30 seconds before my brain is tapped out. So allowing yourself to download and engage in proactive means of stress reduction will help, of course, aid your sleep. Social connection is very important. MIT just came out with a study at the end of last week on the effects. They examined fMRIs around brains with social distancing and found that the effects on the brain were similar to those of hunger drives. We've always understood those drives to be more primal or more base in the brain, but we are seeing some very profound effects of, in effect, craving for human interaction. And so with that, we want to be intentional to counter that experience. We can engage in virtual connection, of course, intentional focus on someone through something like letter writing or doing an activity for someone else. We have excellent research around altruism. That's the act of doing something intending to help, trying to be a caregiver of some sort. So whether that's volunteering or just mentally thinking about inquiring about neighbors or someone you care about in your life, any effort to engage in thoughts of well-being of another typically benefit us, kind of like the old St. Francis prayer, in giving we receive. And so in focusing on others, we are able to reap a benefit for ourselves. All right, so with all of that, I would lastly focus on some online resources to be of help to ourselves. There are myriad resources available ranging from mindfulness and meditation, like mindful.org, or John Kabat-Zinn, that's Kabat with a K, in Massachusetts, kind of the current grandfather of the mindfulness movement, and is able to, in a very fascinating, direct but detailed way, help engage all the senses with an exercise that centers you in the present moment with awareness but without judgment. And he offers online a mindfulness meditation taster that's just like 5 minutes and highly engaging. So I recommend that. There are plenty of colleagues who have offered fantastic resources online. So in addition to apps like Headspace or Calm.com. And if folks are interested in therapy directly, I would encourage use of the Psychology Today national listing of providers. It's very comprehensive, and often people are able to get at the specific issues that they want to be addressed with someone. I would encourage you to look for someone with training in the area of your need. You want to feel traction toward improvement in the area you desire, and a therapeutic alliance. That's the degree of fit. Do you like them, and do you feel they like you? It's really hard to make progress in a relationship where that's not a key ingredient. In fact, we have research has found that's been the dominant driver of change for many years. That was our major focus in graduate school. And of course, if anyone is experiencing distress to the point of thinking that life might not be worth living, or thinking about harm to self or others, absolutely access emergency resources. If your own resources aren't sufficient to bring that safely into check, and not having thoughts of harm to self or others. So there are national crisis lines available, and I would encourage use of your local resources, including your local ER, or calling 911 if necessary. That's what those emergency supports are there for. So if you're having those kinds of thoughts, be sure to reach out for those resources. And I would encourage, I directly recommend mental health treatment for anyone who's had those types of thoughts. So remember, however, you have deep resources in and of yourself. This crisis, deep as it is not the first crisis that we have experienced either as a nation or as individuals. And you have marshaled your way through those experiences and are here today by virtue of your being able to watch this, which tells me that you have resources to have coped well through stress before, and that likely means that you can do so well again. We have, I have an unwavering belief in the power of the human spirit and the resilience that implies. And while this is unprecedented strain with the current crisis, that also means that there's unprecedented coping going on. And I'm pleased to see the TV ads that focus on in this together. If I had the power to project a message similarly, I would add, not only are we in this together, but you are together in this. People are coping far more bravely and resiliently than is being given proportionate focus. So the success in the face of stress is certainly worth celebrating. So these are intended not to be comprehensive, but to just be some tips based on the research that can help us identify what risks are, especially with anxiety or mood symptoms that may have been present to some degree before this crisis and are understandably exacerbated, made worse now that that's here. So that's a very human feeling, but something that we are empowered to help do something about. And I hope if I've been able to contribute in any way to that today, that this can add to your coping and add to your well-being. So from my mind to yours, I wish you well. Thank you.